So a while ago I talked about a game called Shadow Tower Abyss. It was a neat little game released for the PS2 by From Software and distantly related to the famous Dark Souls franchise. In summary, I really liked the game, and it got me wondering, what about other games in the Dark Souls family tree? While Shadow Tower Abyss was more of a cousin, what about a direct ancestor, the grandfather of Dark Souls? Well, the series is a spiritual follow-up to the Kingsfield series, the last of which being Kingsfield 4, it was also a standalone entry, not relating to the 3 previous PS1 games, which I hear are enjoyable, but a bit more aged. It felt like a perfect thing to go to after Shadow Tower Abyss, although this game actually came out before it. But in any case, I excitedly jumped into it for some classic first-person dungeon crawling, and to see the inspiration behind a franchise I really like. Kingsfield 4, or Kingsfield the Ancient City as it was called in the West, is a very interesting game. I would call it a good game overall, but also a very awkward game, almost charmingly so. There's parts that work, parts that don't, and it comes out to something pretty unique feeling. So with that, let's dive into Kingsfield 4 as I show you why you might want to give it a try. As mentioned, this game is separate from the previous Verdite trilogy of Kingsfield 1 through 3, so you don't need any story context. In ages past, there used to be a forested Holy Land where the forest folk lived. Something happened, its name changed from the Holy Land to the Land Disaster. In response, the forest folk went underground and built a big city, the Ancient City. Then one day the king of Helidon was gifted a mysterious idol that brought misfortune and curses, and it was determined it likely originated from the Ancient City. An expedition was organized to return the idol, but it failed, and you, Prince Devian of Azalin, have the idol passed to you with the goal of returning it, lest other kingdoms fall to its curse. I'll point out that this was all in the manual. The game itself basically just starts with, scary idol made the kingdom bad and they couldn't put it back, now it's your turn. As has become more typical from Software's games, Kingsfield 4 doesn't do much in terms of an active story. You won't get much in the way of characters or plot points. Rather, what you will get is environmental storytelling and extensive bits of lore through journal entries. There's entries about the forest folk, the earth folk, what happened to the city, and a whole bunch of stuff. If you want to learn all about the world, you can. But if you want to just focus on the game, you can do that too. The game itself is a first-person hack-and-slash dungeon crawler. You also got some RPG elements, but this is a no character creation kind of RPG. You'll level up as expected by killing enemies for XP, and get stronger in strength or magic just by using them naturally, but you don't have to worry about investing skill points or worrying about builds. Your main focus will be exploring the environments, sorting out whatever monsters you find, and gradually finding keys to progress further through. It doesn't feel like you're progressing to the next area linearly though, not in a level 1, level 2, level 3 sense, but that you're really exploring ancient ruins with the direction of just going wherever you can. The graphics here fit the tone and theme perfectly, although maybe to a slight detriment. When you start above ground, you'll quickly notice why it's called the Cursed Land. Everything is grey and barren, but what people live here generally aren't doing too well. It does a good job of showing you why dealing with that cursed idol might be a bit important. Then when you delve into the ancient city, it feels like what its name suggests. The architecture can be very grand, but while areas are generally distinguishable from each other, they can get a bit samey, and still like to use a very grey and brown color palette. Now this does mean that the handful of times the environment really changes or adds some color, it sticks out to great effect, but I can understand if you said some areas blend together, or you have trouble remembering where a specific location was. The graphics are pretty good overall though. The models for enemies and the rare NPC are well done, enemies themselves being generally varied between areas. Spell effects look cool, it's very confident in terms of its looks, and its bleaker color palette perfectly suits the tone and setting. I'm not one to talk about atmosphere in my videos, as sometimes I feel like I don't get what other people see, but there are moments in Kingsfield 4 when it pulls off the scale of its world or parts of its setting really well. Also, the save statues are these Mind Flayer Cthulhu things. No idea why, I didn't read the lore entries. It does get negative points though for making the status effects a color filter over your screen. It certainly conveys something that's wrong to the player, but it never looks good. What I did like, in a kind of surprising way, was the music, in that the game actually had some. If you don't get what I mean, From Software games can sometimes have very little music to keep up the atmosphere through silence, but they may pop in for some key moments or boss fights. But Kingsfield 4 actually just has constant background music to listen to as you journey through its halls. The tracks generally have a theme of tension and danger in them, and with the right balance between noticeable and not to make for good background noise. So with a From Software style minimal story and extensive lore, and good presentation save for one or two nitpicks, is it the gameplay that makes this game a gem? Yes and no. If I had to summarize it in a sentence, Kingsfield 4 doesn't play like a PS2 upgrade on a PS1 game, it feels like a PS1 game migrated to the PS2. It's a little clunky in certain areas. Movement is almost perfect when it comes to your walking and running speeds and the strafe buttons, but specifically the turning speed is just so slow. Enemies generally aren't speed demons and it's fine once you get used to it, but you will have to get used to it. So okay, you started the game and you're moving around like a champ, then you'll notice these bars on the top of your screen. The ones that look like a health and magic bar are actually your stamina and magic stamina. When you attack, the damage depends on how full the bar is. You could rapid swing your sword, but it won't accomplish much unless you just need a tick more damage dealt. The magic stamina is likely there to avoid spamming. Your actual health bar is the big circle, and no, not in a pie chart way, while your mana is the blue crescent around it in a pie chart way. It's all very functional, but it's an odd UI choice. But what about the actual combat? Well, I actually think it's pretty fun. It's based around a very simple system. You walk up, attack, and then probably move out of the way. While you can equip a shield, it just raises defense, no blocking. It's a footsies game, or a circle strafe game, depends on the enemy. When you start, you'll be 1v1ing slow enemies and think, oh, that's it? But soon you'll find yourself in narrow hallways or in situations with more than one enemy. Maybe their attacks have a very wide swing, or they're more maneuverable. It starts out feeling too simple, but once the game gets going, you realize that's the charm. It doesn't need a bunch of extra systems or combos, rather it asks you to master its fundamental movement and situational awareness to get through combat. There are one or two things to add flavor though. The game of course has magic to act as a ranged option, and the occasional bow and arrow. You get the choice of quick daggers or great swords to suit your style. Maybe you'll need to hold onto a fire element sword for an area where enemies are weak to it. I wouldn't call Kingsfield 4's combat complex, but it's not quite simple in my mind either. It's a little stiff at points, but it does its job. Besides combat, the other thing I feel Kingsfield 4 does well is exploration. You're given basically no direction and asked to dive into the depths of these ruins and see what you can find. And you really get the feeling that you're exploring the place. Sometimes there's monsters to fight, but other times puzzles or environmental hazards. Sometimes you find a fake wall with treasure behind it, or spot an item on the ceiling you can shoot down. You never get the feeling that you know what you'll run into next, and it generally feels like you're exploring the ancient city, not just murdering your way through it. Every now and then you'll just happen upon a boss, a bunch of which are optional. Admittedly, the bosses here are just okay. You can only do so much with this combat system when you just make a bigger enemy, but they can be a very nice challenge and spectacle, a good change of pace. I do also think their approach to fast travel is interesting. Not too far in, you'll get these keystones and wands, where you can place the keystones in statues and use the wands in magic circles to warp to them. Basically, it gives you a set amount of movable warp points to activate and deactivate as you see fit. Now, do I think the game would be harmed if all the fast travel points were always active? Not really, but I think this approach is neat for letting the player customize limited fast travel. But now we get to the section of this video I'll dub mechanics that almost work. As you explore, you'll be finding new equipment very often, and it's basically always better than what you currently have. Why does this matter? Did you know this game has a durability system that's so slow you'll legitimately forget about it? Did you know you can rescue a dwarf halfway through the game to repair your stuff that'll just be worse than what you currently have equipped? You can also upgrade your equipment with materials you've been finding the whole game, not to any meaningful extent though. And no, he isn't in what I would call a convenient spot either, unless you want to use one of your limited fast travel spots just for him. To top it off, weapons and magic spells have an individual experience system. The more you use them, they'll go up to a max level of 3, improving their damage and granting them new abilities. You'll never see this with weapons. Maybe you'll reach level 2 with one, but never level 3. You'll just find a better sword and use that instead. At least when it comes to magic, you only have so many spells, so your healing spell and one or two favorite offensive magics might reach the higher levels, but it feels like they added an extra 0 or something to the required XP. It takes so long for this mechanic to pay off, and it's generally not worth it. And then there's the issue with magic. Every tips list or non-spoiler guide will talk about it, but there's this tree above ground that you can kill for a magic bracelet that ups your MP. By 5. Not as in it goes from 10 to 15, as in 10 to 50. and this is surprisingly not a lot of MP. It feels like this was the normal MP, but they locked it behind having this one accessory on at all times. It's like a joke equipment slot, because there's no reason to equip any other bracelet. From the start of the game, that equipment slot is there for this one bracelet. Speaking of the start of the game, one final gripe. Whose idea was it to make the From Software traditional poison area the first area you need to go to? Not the second, the first. The slime's poison on contact and your initial weapon doesn't have good reach. It's just mean. I could see people legitimately being turned off from this first impression. Regardless, gripes and all, while I find it hard to describe why I like Kingsfield 4 without swerving around all the clunky parts about it, I definitely had fun. Its combat is simple, but also engaging and fair. It's not the best looking PS2 game, but it's not bad either. It has its problems, but the way it captures the feeling of exploration gives it charm to compensate. It's looked at fondly for good reason. So if you're a fan of Dark Souls and want to see where a lot of its inspirations came from, a fan of first-person dungeon crawlers, or you just want to delve into the unknown and see what there is to find, go play Kingsfield 4: The Ancient City. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you liked it for some weird reason, consider leaving a like or comment. If you didn't like it, well, leave a comment anyways about what I did wrong. If you want to hear about more games I think are neat, or whatever random thing I end up making videos on, maybe also think about subscribing. Whatever you choose to do, I hope you have a nice day.